I doubt she can even read the menu, he sneered, loud enough for the whole damn restaurant. That's how it started. Another titan flexing on the help. Conrad Beaumont thought he was about to break Naomi, a waitress drowning in debt and dreams deferred. He had no clue. See, what Beaumont didn't know, couldn't possibly imagine, was that beneath the uniform beat the heart of a scholar, a woman fluent in the language of kings and the art of quiet rebellion, a PhD buried alive by circumstance and a mother's medical bills. He thought he was humiliating a waitress. Big mistake. What's coming? Let's just say his casual cruelty was about to unleash a storm of unexpected consequences. A kindness is coming that'll alter her fate. A billionaire dripping in arrogance looked at his waitress and sneered. She can't even read the menu. He expected her to crumble. He expected tears. What he got instead was a lesson in history, culture, and language so profound it would shatter his ego and echo through the city's elite. This is the story of Naomi the waitress, who silenced a titan, not with anger, but with the one thing his money could never buy: true class. The air inside Liel was different. It wasn't just filtered. It felt curated, thinned of the city's frantic energy, and enriched with the subtle aromas of truffle oil, clarified butter, and old money. On the Upper East Side, the restaurant was a sanctuary for those who didn't just dine, but performed the act of dining. The chandeliers dripping with Austrian crystal cast a soft, forgiving light on the patrons, smoothing away the wrinkles of age and the hard edges of corporate takeovers. The silence was a performance in itself, a tapestry woven from the gentle clink of Christopher silverware against Bernardo porcelain and the hushed conspiratorial whispers of the city's most powerful people. Naomi Parker moved through this world like a ghost. At 27, she wore the restaurant's severe black uniform, a custom-tailored suit that felt more like armor, with a grace that belied the exhaustion settling deep in her bones. To the diners, she was a pair of hands, a polite smile, a vessel for their orders. They didn't see the scholar behind her eyes, the woman who had once spent her days translating 17th century French poetry, her nights debating the nuances of pea and dusty university libraries. They didn't see the daughter consumed by the gnawing anxiety of her mother's mounting medical bills, a debt so colossal it had forced her to trade her PhD candidacy for a silver tray and an impeccable customer service smile. Her mother, a history teacher who had filled their tiny New Jersey apartment with books and a love for the world, was now trapped in a sterile room, fighting a battle Naomi could only fund, not fight herself. So Naomi served. She served the hedge fund managers who discussed firing 200 people over a $400 bottle of Chateau Margaux. She served the society wives who picked at their $80 salads and complained about the hardships of renovating their Hamptons estates. She served and she listened, and a part of her withered with every differential nod. Tonight was different. The air was charged with a particular brand of arrogance radiating from a corner booth. The source was Conrad Beaumont. Beaumont wasn't old money. He was a brute force of nature, a real estate mogul who had bludgeoned his way into the city's elite with a portfolio of gleaming, soulless skyscrapers and a personality to match. He was loud where others were quiet, flashy where they were discreet. He wore a watch that cost more than Naomi's entire student debt, and he gestured with it frequently as if to remind everyone of its existence. With him were two people who orbited his gravitational pull of wealth. There was Brittany, his third wife, a woman barely older than Naomi, whose face was a testament to the finest cosmetic procedures money could buy. She stared at her phone, her expression a blank canvas of boredom. The other was Leland Pryor, a junior partner at Beaumont's firm, a man whose spine seemed to have been surgically removed to facilitate a more efficient form of siphancy. He laughed a fraction of a second too early at Beaumont's jokes and nodded vigorously at his every pronouncement. Naomi had been assigned their table. Her colleague, a veteran waiter named George, had given her a sympathetic look. "Good luck," he'd muttered. "He's a 2-bottle of Bordeaux and 0-tip kind of guy, and a sadist." From the moment Naomi approached, the performance began. "Wine list," Beaumont barked, not looking at her. He snapped his fingers, a gesture of such blatant disrespect it made Naomi's jaw tighten. She presented the leather-bound tome with a quiet, Of course, sir. He scanned it, his lips moving slightly as he tried to pass the French names. Get me the Patras, the 05. He said it like, Pet Russ, the S, hissing into the quiet room. Naomi's training kicked in. Her face remained a placid mask. An excellent choice, sir. The 2005 Petros is a remarkable vintage. She pronounced it correctly. Peter, the silent, the vowels pure. It was a subtle correction, almost imperceptible, but Beaumont's eyes narrowed. He had noticed. It was a tiny in his armor of perceived sophistication. The meal progressed like a slow-motion car crash. Beaumont complained that his steak, ordered rare, was too bloody. He sent back a side dish, claiming the asparagus was limp. Each complaint was delivered with a theatrical sigh, a public declaration of his superior palate. Leland would chime in with inexcusable Conrad. Your standards are just higher. Brittany remained engrossed in her phone, occasionally looking up to pout for a selfie. Naomi handled each issue with robotic efficiency. I will have the chef prepare another for you immediately, sir. My apologies, sir. I will replace it at once. Her calmness seemed to infuriate him more. He was a predator who enjoyed the panic of his prey, and she was giving him nothing. Then came the moment for the main course selection. The tension at the table was thick enough to be carved with the silver fish knives. Beaumont had been building to this. He was going to make his point. He was going to put the quiet, efficient waitress in her place. He scanned the menu, his finger landing on one of the most complex and traditionally prepared items, a dish rarely ordered by the restaurant's American clientele. I'll have the he began, his voice booming across the hushed dining room. He stumbled over the name, a mangle of butchered French, the rendezvous al déjeuner. He pronounced it rendezvous al déjeuner. Leland chuckled a wet, unpleasant sound. Only you, Conrad, always picking the most exotic thing. Beaumont leaned back, a smug grin spreading across his face. He looked directly at Naomi, then gestured to the menu with a dismissive flick of his wrist. His voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to turn their heads, dripped with condescending poison. You know what? He said, his eyes glinting with malice. I don't even know if she can help me. I doubt she can even read the menu. The words hung in the air, brutal and sharp. The clinking of silverware stopped. The whispers died. In that gilded cage, every eye was now on the black waitress in the Billionaire, who had just publicly stripped her of her competence, her intelligence, her very presence. Brittany looked up from her phone, a flicker of interest in her eyes. Leland's grin widened. Naomi felt a hot flush creep up her neck. Her training, her composure, the wall she had built around herself, brick by painful brick, began to tremble. In his eyes, she wasn't a person. She was a prop in his display of power, a thing to be belittled for sport. All the slights, all the condescension, all the sacrifices she had made. The library nights traded for aching feet. The academic journals for greasy aprons coalesced into a single point of brilliant, searing anger. She stood perfectly still. Her hands clasped behind her back were steady. She took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the curated air of Lierlou fill her lungs. And then she broke character. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She met Conrad Beaumont's gaze, and the scholar she had locked away stepped forward. Her voice, when it came, was not the clipped, polite tone of a waitress. It was fluid, melodic, and resonant. The French that flowed from her lips was not the textbook French of a high school class. It was the flawless Parisian accented French of someone who had lived and breathed the language, who had loved its poetry and dissected its history. Mercure Beaumont. She began her tone soft but edged with steel. The shift was so sudden and so absolute that Beaumont's smirk faltered. Sample sit on Poème d'Orgon. Forgive me, Mr. Bon, but the V kidneys in a John-style sauce are not simply a dish. It is a poem from Burgundy. She didn't stop. She didn't give him a moment to recover. 4. Music tradition demand. Here's that the kidneys are sautéed on high heat in clarified butter just enough to sear the outside while keeping the center pink and tender. The sauce, the famous Jones, is not simply mustard. It is a delicate balance of old-style John mustard, the kind with whole mustard seeds, deglazed with a regional white wine, typically an aligote, then enriched with creme fraiche and a touch of fresh chopped parsley. The dining room was utterly silent. A chef peeking from the kitchen doorway stood frozen. Mr. Dubois, the restaurant's stern French-born manager, had stopped mid-stride on his way to another table, his face a mask of astonishment. Naomi held Beaumont's gaze, her eyes unwavering. She was no longer a waitress. She was a lecturer, and he was her sole inadequate student. L'Ouidar crucial, she continued, her voice gaining a quiet confidence. Borg make the choice of mustard is crucial. A mustard that is too aggressive would overwhelm the delicate flavor of the via. It is a dish that speaks of the terroir of the land of Burgundy itself. It is rustic yet demands execution of absolute finesse. Perhaps you would prefer that I ask the chef to ensure the balance is perfect for you, sir, or perhaps something less nuanced. She finished the final French syllable, hanging in the air like a perfectly held musical note. The silence stretched profound and heavy. Conrad Beaumont, the titan of industry, the master of the universe, sat speechless. His face, normally ruddy with confidence, had drained of all color. He looked smaller, somehow deflated in his expensive suit. Leland Pryor's sycophantic grin had been wiped clean, replaced by a look of horrified disbelief. Naomi had done more than just read the menu. She had recited its soul, and in doing so she had exposed him not as a connoisseur, but as a fraud. She had held up a mirror, and for the first time in a long time, Conrad Beaumont had been forced to see his own reflection. The silence that followed Naomi's monologue was not empty. It was a vacuum sucking the air and the arrogance out of the room. Every diner, every staff member was a statue in a tableau of shock. Conrad Beaumont's mouth was slightly agape, his eyes wide with a mixture of fury and profound humiliation. He had intended to swat a fly, and had instead disturbed a hornet's nest of linguistic and culinary expertise he couldn't possibly comprehend. Brittany was the first to move. She slowly lowered her phone, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. For the first time all evening, she looked at her husband with an expression that wasn't boredom, but a cool, detached assessment. She had just witnessed him being publicly dismantled, not by a business rival, but by a waitress. The power dynamic she had married into had just flickered. Leland Pryor. Ever the weather vane looked from Beaumont to Naomi and back again, his face a mess of confusion. The master he served had been wounded, and he had no protocol for this situation. His instinct for sycophancy was short-circuiting. Naomi stood her ground, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The adrenaline that had fueled her eloquence began to recede, replaced by a cold wave of fear. What have I done? The question screamed in her mind. She had just committed the cardinal sin of the service industry. She had made the customer feel small, and not just any customer, a billionaire with a notoriously fragile ego and a vindictive streak as wide as his bank account. Her job, the very thing that kept a roof over her head and paid for her mother's care, was hanging by a thread she had just set on fire. Finally, Beaumont found his voice. It was a low, guttural growl, stripped of its earlier bombast. "Get me your manager," he rasped, his eyes never leaving Naomi's. The words were a threat, a promise of retribution. Before Naomi could even respond, a figure glided to the table. It was Mr. Dubois, the general manager. He was a man in his late 50s, always impeccably dressed with a severe haircut and an air of perpetual controlled stress. He was French, truly French, from a small town near Lyon, and he ran Liel with the precision of a military commander. He had heard everything. "Is there a problem, Mr. Beaumont?" Dubois asked, his voice smooth as velvet, but with a core of granite. His eyes flickered towards Naomi for a fraction of a second. Unreadable. Beaumont pointed a trembling finger at Naomi. This girl," he spat the word dripping with venom, "has a problem with authority, a smart mouth. I want her gone now. I come here. I spend thousands of dollars, and I will not be lectured by the help." Dubois' face remained impassive. He turned his gaze to Naomi. "Mademoiselle Parker, please go to my office. I will join you shortly." "George," he called out to Naomi's colleague, who was hovering nervously nearby. "Please take over for Mr. Beaumont's table." Naomi gave a single tight nod. She didn't look at Beaumont. She couldn't. She turned on her heel and walked away, feeling the stares of the entire dining room on her back. Each step towards the manager's office felt like a step towards the gallows. The walk took her past a small two-person table near the window. A woman dining alone, elegant and sharp, featured with intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses, met Naomi's gaze. The woman gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod of approval. Naomi, flustered and terrified, barely registered it, her mind already replaying the scene, calculating the cost of her defiance. In his office, a small cluttered room smelling of old paper and espresso, Naomi sat on a stiff chair, her hands twisting in her lap. The minutes stretched into an eternity. She could hear the muted sounds of the restaurant outside, a world from which she felt she had just been ejected. She thought of her mother. She thought of the next stack of bills. The pride she had felt moments ago had curdled into pure stomach-churning panic. When Dubois finally entered, he closed the door with a soft click that sounded like a jail cell locking. He didn't sit. He stood in front of her, his arms crossed, his expression stern. "Explain yourself, Parker," he said, his French accent thickening with his displeasure. Naomi swallowed hard. "Mr. Dubois." He was intentionally demeaning. He said, "I couldn't read in front of everyone. I reacted." "You did more than react." Dubois countered, his voice low. "You eviscerated him. You used your knowledge as a weapon. In my restaurant, it was the truth." Naomi whispered, her voice shaking. "The truth." Dubois let out a short, humorless laugh. "The truth is that Conrad Bowman's company holds the lease on this building. The truth is that he brings clients here who spend more in one night than you make in 3 months. That is the truth that matters in this business." Naomi's heart sank. It was as she feared. Power and money would always win. Dubois paced the small office. "He is demanding that I fire you. He has threatened to not only never return, but to make us stink, as he so elegantly put it, to tell his friends, his colleagues, to blacklist us." "So you're going to fire me?" Naomi said the words flat, devoid of hope. Dubois stopped pacing and looked at her, his expression shifting from anger to something more complex. A flicker of something. Weariness. Respect. "What you did out there," he said slowly, "was the single most unprofessional, insubordinate, and reckless act I have ever witnessed from a member of my staff." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "It was also magnificent." Naomi looked up, stunned. "I have not heard French like that since I left my grandmother's kitchen in Leon." Dubois continued, a faint smile, touching his lips for the first time. "You didn't just describe the dish. You understood it. Where did you learn to speak like that?" I was working on my doctorate," Naomi admitted quietly. "French literature before I had to stop." Dubois nodded slowly, a piece of the puzzle clicking into place. He looked at the young woman in front of him, seeing her for the first time. Not as Waitress Parker, but as a scholar in a cage. "Mr. Beaumont has put me in an impossible position," he said, his tone turning serious again. "I cannot afford to make an enemy of him, but I will not be bullied into firing my best staff member either, especially one who has more class in her little finger than he has in his entire bank account." Relief washed over Naomi so intensely, it almost made her dizzy. However, Dubois continued, "I cannot ignore this. It was a disruption. You are a liability right now. I'm putting you on paid administrative leave for 2 weeks. Go home. Stay quiet. Let this blow over. I will handle Beaumont. I will tell him you have been severely disciplined. We will hope his ego is satisfied with that." It wasn't a firing, but it felt like a punishment, a suspension, a clear sign that even when you were right, you could still lose. "Thank you, Mr. Dubois," she managed to say. "Don't thank me yet," he warned. "Men like Beaumont do not forget her humiliation. This may not be over. Go use the back exit." As Naomi slipped out into the cool night air of the service alley, the city's noise rushing back in, she felt a profound sense of isolation. She had won the battle of words, but she was deeply afraid she was about to lose the war. Meanwhile, back in the dining room, the woman who had nodded at Naomi was settling her bill. Her name was Genevieve Laurent, a respected, if not yet famous, food journalist for a prominent online magazine known for its long-form, narrative-driven articles. She wasn't a traditional critic who wrote about juice and foam. She wrote about the stories behind the food, the people who made it the culture it came from, She hadn't just seen a confrontation, she had seen a story, a powerful, resonant story about dignity, hidden talent, and the gross imbalances of power that play out every day in places like Lille. She paid her bill in cash, and as she walked out onto the street, she wasn't thinking about the quality of her meal. She was thinking about her opening sentence. Conrad Beaumont had wanted to make a stink. Genevieve Laurel was about to create a storm. The 2 weeks of paid leave were a special kind of torment for Naomi. The silence of her small apartment in Queens was a stark contrast to the cacophony of the restaurant. There were no orders to take, no tables to clear, no condescending remarks to swallow. There was only the low hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, and the suffocating weight of uncertainty. Every phone call made her jump, expecting it to be Mr. Dubois, telling her not to come back. Every email notification carried the potential for disaster. She spent the days caring for her mother, whose condition remained fragile. The trips to the hospital were a grim reminder of why she needed her job so desperately. Her mother, a woman of fierce intellect, now weakened by illness, would ask about her work. Naomi would lie painting a picture of mundane normally, hiding the drama that had upended her life. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. She had defended her dignity, but she felt more powerless than ever, adrift in a sea of buoyance. Making. Meanwhile, Genevieve Lauren was writing. She typed not in a sterile office, but in her sun-drenched Brooklyn apartment, surrounded by stacks of books and the aroma of strong coffee. She knew she had a delicate and explosive story. Directly naming Conrad Beaumont would invite lawsuits from a man known for his litigious nature. Directly naming Naomi would put the young woman's job and safety at risk. So she wrote around them. Her article, published a week into Naomi's suspension, was titled The Menu. It didn't appear in the food section. It was on the front page of the Culture and Society vertical. It began not with an attack, but with a question. What is the true cost of a luxury meal? Genevieve masterfully set the scene. A temple of hot cuisine in Manhattan, a place of hushed reverence and astronomical prices. She described the patrons, the titans and their consorts, and the staff, the silent, efficient figures in black. Then she introduced her archetypes, the mogul, a man of new money and ancient insecurities, and the scholar, a waitress with eyes that held a history far richer than the vintage of the wine she was pouring. She recounted the entire scene with breathtaking detail, capturing the dialogue without using quotation marks, embedding it in the narrative. The mogul's tearing remark, I doubt she can even read the menu, was presented as the climax of an evening of petty cruelties. And then she described the scholar's response. She didn't just translate the French. She explained why it was so devastatingly effective. She wrote it was not a rebuttal. It was a lesson in a language she had tried to weaponize. She delivered a dissertation on culture, history, and terroir. She did not raise her voice. She raised the entire conversation to a level he could not reach. In 3 minutes, she demonstrated the vast, unbridgeable canyon between wealth and class, between possessing everything and understanding anything. She didn't just silence him. She rendered him irrelevant. The article ended with a poignant reflection on the invisible lives and hidden talents of the people in the service industry. It asked its readers to look beyond the uniform to consider the stories and struggles of the people who served them. It never named Lucielle. It never named Naomi Parker. It never named Conrad Beaumont. It didn't have to. The story detonated online. It was shared on Twitter by authors and journalists on Facebook, by service industry workers who felt seen for the first time on LinkedIn, by executives discussing modern leadership and respect. The comment sections were a wildfire of speculation. This has to be an NYC Upper East Side for sure. I know exactly who the mogul is, famous for being a pig. Anyone who has ever waited a table is cheering for the scholar right now. Within 48 hours, the menu was the most read article on the magazine site. Podcasts discussed it. Morning news shows referenced it. The anonymity of the subjects only fueled the fire, turning it into a citywide guessing game. For the elite of New York, the details were too specific to ignore. The description of the mogul, the flashy watch, the trophy wife, the sycophantic associate, the palant for bludgeoning his way through situations pointed in one very specific, very public direction. Conrad Beaumont was at his desk in his penthouse office overlooking Central Park when his PR director, a perpetually stressed woman named Cynthia, forwarded him the link with the subject line, "Urgent." "We need to discuss." Beaumont read it. Then he read it again. A vein throbbed in his temple. The blood drained from his face, leaving a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. It was him. Every humiliating detail was there, wrapped in elegant prose that only made the exposure more gling. The writer had turned his moment of power into a parable of his ownishness. "Who wrote this?" He roared at Cynthia over the intercom. Find out who talked to them. Was it the manager Dubois? Was it that little waitress?" His paranoia spiraled. He was in the middle of negotiating a massive legacy deconfining deal to build a new cultural center, a deal that required the cooperation of the city's old money philanthropists and cultural gatekeepers. The very people who would read an article like this and see him as the boorish caricature he secretly feared he was. This story didn't just wound his ego, it threatened his empire. It made him look like a buffoon, a man without the subtlety and grace required to helm a project of cultural significance. His phone rang. It was a board member from one of the foundations he was courting. The man's tone was breezy, but the question was pointed. "Conrad say, did you see that piece in Canvas magazine? The one about the restaurant Wild story? Almost sounds like someone we know." Beaumont felt a cold sweat on his neck. The story wasn't just a story anymore. It was a narrative, and it was sticking to him. The tremors of the silence in that restaurant had become an earthquake, and the ground was cracking right under his feet. He had tried to crush one person's spirit, and in doing so, he had handed a weapon to the entire city to use against him. He slammed his fist on his desk. He had to fix this. He had to find the source. He had to regain control of the narrative. His obsession shifted from punishing Naomi to silencing the story itself. But it was already too late. The story didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to everyone. For Naomi, the world had shrunk to the four walls of her apartment and the sterile corridors of the hospital. She saw the article because her friend, another former grad student who now worked as a paralegal, sent it to her. The subject line was just a series of exclamation points. Naomi read it with a feeling of dizzying dissociation. It was her life, her humiliation, her moment of defiance, all laid bare for the world to see. Yet she was an anonymous ghost at the center of it. Genevieve Laurent had protected her identity, but in doing so had made her story public property. She read the comments, the praise for the scholar, the condemnation of the mogul. It was vindicating but also terrifying. She was no longer just Naomi Parker, out-of-work waitress. She was a symbol, a hashtag waiting to happen. She felt exposed as if a spotlight had found her, even in the shadows of her forced leave. Her toe suspension was nearly over when an email landed in her inbox. The sender's name made her breath catch in her throat. Dr. Philip Rowe. Dr. Rowe had been her PhD advisor, her mentor. He was a titan in the world of French historical studies, a man whose opinion she valued more than almost anyone's. She hadn't spoken to him in over a year, not since her shame-filled call to tell him she was withdrawing from the program. Opening the email felt like reopening a wound. Subject: a long shot. "But is this you? Dear Naomi, I hope this message finds you well. I am writing on a bit of a strange whim. A rather extraordinary article has been making the rounds in academic circles. I've attached it here. It's titled The Menu. It tells the story of an unnamed waitress, a scholar of French, who found herself in a challenging situation. As I read it, a few details stood out. The description of her linguistic precision, her deep knowledge of Burgundian history and culture, it sounded remarkably familiar. It sounded like the student who wrote that brilliant seminar paper on the socio-economic impact of the salt tax in 17th century Burgundy. It is perhaps a wild guess, but I had to ask, was that you, Naomi? Regardless of your answer, reading this piece made me think of you and the great promise you showed. It reminded me of what a loss it was for the department when you had to leave. Which brings me to my second more important point. An opportunity has arisen. The University of Lyon, in partnership with our own institution, has just announced the inaugural Méline Dubois Fellowship for Franco-American Historical Research. It's a fully funded 2-year research position based in Lyon. The fellow will have complete access to the municipal archives to study the region's cultural and economic history. Naomi, it has your name written all over it. The application deadline is technically last week. However, Malene was a dear friend of mine, and I am on the selection committee. If you are interested, if you are able to even consider it, I can make a call. We would need a formal application and a statement of purpose by the end of the week. I know life may have taken you down a different path, but talent like yours is rare. I truly hope you will consider it. Warmly, Philip. Naomi read the email 3 times, her vision blurring with tears. It was a lifeline, a ghost from her old life, reaching out to pull her back from the abyss. Lion research, the very dream she had been forced to bury. For a moment, the fear and anxiety vanished, replaced by a dazzling, terrifying spark of hope. Could she really go back? The thought was so overwhelming, so beautiful, it felt dangerous. Meanwhile, Conrad Beaumont's world was contracting. The cultural center deal, his magnum opus, was stalling. A key benefactor, an old money matriarch who sat on the board of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, had called him for a chat. She had spoken about the importance of character and public perception for such a prominent project. She never mentioned the article, but the subtext was a sledgehammer. The narrative was poisoning him. His PR director, Cynthia, was in crisis mode. "Conrad, we can't kill the story," she said, pacing his office. "It's too big now. Trying to suppress it will only confirm it's about you. We have to change the narrative." "And how do we do that?" he snarled. "You have to get ahead of it. You have to be the bigger man, the magnanimous one." She explained, her voice urgent. "You find the waitress, you apologize publicly, and then you help her. You offer her a job, a scholarship, something that makes you look like a patron, not a bully. You turn your villain into your protégé." Beaumont recoiled, apologized to her. "Are you insane?" The idea of humbling himself before the woman who had humiliated him was physically repulsive. "It's not about what you feel, Conrad. It's about optics." Cynthia shot back her professional desperation, overriding her fear of him. "Right now, you're the mogul, a rich jerk who bullies waitresses. If you do this, you become Conrad Beaumont, the tough but fair titan who recognized brilliance in an unexpected place and rewarded it. It's a redemption story. The media will eat it up. It saves the deal and it saves your reputation." He hated it. He hated every single thing about it. It felt like a surrender. But as he looked out over the city, over the empire he had built, he knew she was right. His legacy was at stake. The means no longer mattered, only the ends. "Fine," he bit out. "Find her, find the girl, make a meeting. We'll play it your way." The hunt began. It wasn't hard. Beaumont's resources were vast. A few calls from his security chief to industry contacts, a discreet inquiry to a contact inside a restaurant payment processing company, and a cross-reference with employee records from upscale French restaurants on the Upper East Side. Within a day, they had a name: Naomi Parker, Queens, New York, currently on administrative leave from Lille. Just as Naomi was beginning to sketch out a statement of purpose for the fellowship in Lyon, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a message appeared. "Miss Parker, my name is Cynthia Lyle. I am the Executive Vice President of Communications for Beaumont Enterprises. Mr. Conrad Beaumont has asked to meet with you to discuss a matter of mutual importance. He is prepared to make you a very generous offer. Please call me back at your earliest convenience." Naomi stared at her phone, the blood turning to ice in her veins. He had found her. The man who had tried to break her was now reaching out with a generous offer. It felt less like an olive branch and more like the first touch of a spider's web. She now stood at a crossroads she could never have imagined. In one hand, she held an email that offered her a path back to her authentic self, a path of intellectual pursuit and quiet dignity paved with difficulty and uncertainty. In the other, she held a voicemail that offered a shortcut, a transactional solution from the very man who had caused her pain, a path paved with his money and his motives. The choice she made would define not just her future, but who she was. The voicemail from Beaumont Enterprises was a serpent coiling in the heart of Naomi's quiet Queens apartment. For 2 days, she let it lie there, a toxic promise she was terrified to touch. The voice of Cynthia Lawle, smooth and corporate, replayed in her mind a stark contrast to the warm, hopeful words of Dr. Rowe's email, which she had printed and kept on her nightstand like a holy text. The two messages represented two entirely different futures, two fundamentally different Naomis. One path was a superhighway paved in gold. She could almost feel the weight of Beaumont's money, a heavy blanket that could smother all her anxieties. She pictured her mother's medical debt vanishing with a single wire transfer. She imagined her mother in a private room with a window overlooking a garden, receiving the best care money could buy, without the constant gnawing fear of the next bill. The thought was a siren song, seductive and overwhelmingly powerful. All she had to do was attend a meeting. All she had to do was listen. The other path was a narrow, winding trail up a mountain she had been forced to abandon years ago. It promised not comfort, but challenge, not wealth, but fulfillment. The fellowship in Lyle was a return to her soul's true home, a life of dusty archives, intellectual rigor, and the quiet pursuit of knowledge. It offered no immediate solutions to her financial burdens. It was a promise of a different kind of richness, one that couldn't be spent, but could never be taken away. On the second night, she sat by her mother's hospital bed, holding her frail hand. Her mother, lucid in the evening, quiet, looked at her. "You seem troubled, my love, more than usual." Naomi forced a smile. "Just tired, Mom. Long, weak." Her mother squeezed her hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "Naomi, I didn't raise you to be just tired. I raised you to be brilliant. Whatever it is, don't you dare sell your brilliance short. It is the one thing in this world that is truly yours." The word struck Naomi with the force of a physical blow. Don't sell your brilliance short. That was exactly what Beaumont wanted to do. He didn't want to hire her brilliance. He wanted to purchase it, package it, and put it on display to burnish his own tarnished name. In that moment, the conflict within her resolved into a single hard point of clarity. She knew she had to go to the meeting, not to consider the offer, but to formally reject it, to face the man who had tried to humiliate her and show him unequivocally that she could not be bought. She owed him nothing, but she owed her mother and herself this final act of self-possession. The next morning, she prepared for the meeting, not as a candidate preparing for an interview, but as a sovereign nation preparing for a diplomatic negotiation. She chose her outfit with meticulous care. It was a uniform of a different sort, not the black suit of a waitress designed for invisibility, but a simple charcoal gray dress her mother had helped her pick out for her first academic conference. Over it, she wore her mother's old college blazer, its tweed fabric, a soft, tangible connection to a legacy of intellect and integrity. She looked not like a supplicant, but like a scholar. The journey into Manhattan was a journey between worlds. The rumbling, democratic chaos of the 7 train filled with the tired, hopeful faces of 100 different countries gave way to the cold, imposing canyons of Midtown. Beaumont Tower was a shard of smoked glass and steel punching a hole in the sky. It wasn't built to be beautiful. It was built to be dominant. The lobby was a cathedral of corporate power. The air was chilled and silent, the floors of polished black marble reflecting the cold, distant light. A security guard with an earpiece watched her with impassive eyes as she approached the concierge. Announcing her name felt like a confession. Cynthia Lawle met her by the elevator bank. She was flawlessly put together, her smile a masterpiece of professional warmth that didn't reach her eyes. "Ms. Parker, thank you so much for coming. Mr. Beaumont is very much looking forward to speaking with you." The elevator ascended with unnerving speed and silence, a hermetically sealed capsule rising to the heavens of capital. Naomi's ears popped. Cynthia made small talk about the weather, her voice a placid surface on a deep and dangerous ocean. Naomi simply nodded, conserving her energy, focusing her mind. The boardroom was even more intimidating than she had imagined. It was a sterile expanse of glass and stone dominated by the single monstrously long table of polished obsidian. But the true power move was the view. 3 walls were floor-to-ceiling windows offering a god's-eye panorama of the city. It was a view designed to communicate one thing: I own all of this. You are a speck. Conrad Beaumont was waiting at the far end of the table, a king on his throne. He stood as she entered, a performance of chivalry that felt rehearsed and hollow. "Miss Parker." He began, his voice a smooth, calibrated baritone that echoed slightly in the vast room. "Naomi, thank you for coming. Please sit." Naomi chose a chair several seats away from him, creating a deliberate buffer of space. She placed her bag on the floor and her hands on the cool, unforgiving surface of the table. She met his gaze and waited her silence, a refusal to be the first to blink. "I'll get straight to the point," he said, leaning forward. The picture of a man who values his time. "What happened at the restaurant was unfortunate, a misunderstanding. I have a gruff way about me. I expect the best, and sometimes my passion comes out sideways." Naomi listened, her expression unreadable. She recognized the classic non-apology instantly, a rhetorical device to absolve the speaker of all responsibility. "It wasn't my fault. It's just my passion." Her internal resolve hardened like tempered steel. "I was, however," he continued, pivoting smoothly, "impressed, deeply impressed. Your command of the language, your depth of knowledge, it was remarkable. It showed me that you are a person of immense and frankly wasted talent." He gestured to Cynthia, who slid a sleek, leather-bound folder across the table. It stopped directly in front of Naomi. For a moment, she just looked at it. The temptation was a physical thing, a low hum of electricity. "I believe that talent should be rewarded," Beaumont declared, his voice swelling with magnanimity. "I believe in lifting people up. That's why I've asked you here. I want to offer you a position at Beaumont Enterprises. We've created a new role." Cynthia chimed in, her voice bright. "Director of Cultural Liaison. You would work with our philanthropic wing, advising on our partnerships with museums, orchestras, and of course, the new cultural center. Your knowledge of European history and culture would be invaluable." Against her better judgment, Naomi opened the folder. The first page was a letter of offer. Her eyes scanned past the jargon to the bottom line. The salary was printed in bold. It was a number so large it seemed fictional, more money than her mother had made in the last 5 years combined. A wave of dizziness washed over her. That number could solve everything. It could erase the past, secure the present, and cushion the future. It was a weapon designed to disarm her will. Beaumont saw her pause. He smiled, sensing victory. "The salary would be, let's say, a significant improvement on your current situation. 6 figures, full benefits, a corporate apartment in one of my buildings. We would take care of everything." He leaned back, spreading his hands. "All your troubles gone." Naomi closed the folder with a soft final click. She pushed it gently back to the center of the table. She lifted her eyes, and the doubt that had flickered within them was gone, replaced by a calm, unwavering light. "Mr. Beaumont," she said, her voice even and clear, "I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me, and I thank you for this document." Her formality was a shield, a wall he could not breach. "But I must decline your offer." The air in the room shifted. Beaumont's smile twitched, a barely perceptible crack in the facade. Cynthia froze, her professional poise faltering. This was not in the script. "I think you misunderstand," Beaumont said, his tone losing its warmth, gaining a hard, patronizing edge. "This is a life-changing opportunity." "Oh, I understand it perfectly," Naomi replied, a newfound strength flowing into her. "You have a public relations crisis born from a viral story in which you are the villain. You need to change the narrative. So you create a position for the story's heroine. You offer me a generous salary to become a symbol in your redemption story. You would parade me out at galas and board meetings, the brilliant waitress you, in your great wisdom, discovered and elevated." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp and analytical. "This isn't a job offer, Mr. Beaumont. It's a transaction. The most sophisticated form of hush money I've ever encountered. You want to purchase my silence and my compliance, and you've put a very high price on it. But my integrity was not listed on the menu that night, and it is not for sale now." Beaumont's face, stripped of its benevolent mask, was now a thundercloud of rage. The pretense was over. "That's a very cynical way to look at a generous offer, young lady," he snarled. "A person in your position can't afford to be so proud." The words meant to wound had the opposite effect. They ignited the last of her fear into pure, focused strength. "A person in my position," Naomi countered, her voice ringing with conviction, Can't afford not to be. My mother is sick. I have debts that keep me awake at night. Believe me, the money in that folder is not an abstract concept to me. It would be the easy path, but it would cost me the one thing I have left that is entirely my own." She rose from her chair, her movement fluid and certain. Standing, she was no longer a small figure at a vast table. She was his equal. "You and I value different things, Mr. Beaumont. You value acquisitions, optics, control. You thought you could diminish me by mocking my job, and now you think you can possess me with a new one. But my work as a waitress does not define my worth, and your money cannot define my future." She took a step back from the table, a final physical declaration of her freedom. "I came here today to tell you that I don't need your help. The talent you were so impressed by has already opened a door for me. A real one. An email from my old professor arrived 2 days ago. It seems my story, the anonymous version, reached him. He has nominated me for the inaugural Madeleine Dubois Research Fellowship. I've accepted. I'll be moving to Lyon, France to complete the academic work I was forced to abandon." She let the words settle in the silent, cavernous room. She saw the flicker of disbelief and fury in his eyes. She hadn't just rejected his offer. She had revealed it to be wholly unnecessary. She had a better one. "So thank you for the offer, Mr. Beaumont, but I don't want to be your director of cultural liaison. I'd rather be myself." Without another word, she turned her back on him and walked toward the door. She didn't run. She didn't look back. She could feel his enraged stare on her. The silent, sputtering fury of a man who had been outmaneuvered, a man used to buying anything he wanted, who had just discovered something priceless. As the heavy glass door whispered shut behind her, sealing Conrad Beaumont in his sterile, opulent prison, Naomi Parker stepped into the elevator. Descending from that cold peak of power, she felt not smaller, but larger. And when she walked out of the tower's imposing entrance and into the brilliant, chaotic afternoon sun of New York City, she took a deep breath. The air no longer felt thin. It tasted of exhaust fumes, hot pretzels, and boundless beautiful possibility. She was still in debt. Her mother was still sick, but she was free. Naomi's story isn't just about a clever comeback in a fancy restaurant. It's a powerful reminder that our circumstances don't define our worth. True wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or skyscrapers, but in knowledge, resilience, and the courage to stand by your own integrity. Naomi walked away from a six-figure salary, not because she was foolish, but because she was wise enough to know the difference between a price tag and true value. She chose the difficult path of her own dreams over the easy comfort of a golden cage. Her story forces us to ask ourselves, what is our own dignity worth? If Naomi's journey from quiet desperation to triumphant self-possession moved you, please give this video a like to help her story reach more people. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner strength. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true stories that uncover the extraordinary strength hidden in everyday life. Click that notification bell so you never miss a chapter. Thank you for listening.